My dear son, my dear daughter, it is I, Jesus, the one who knows every beat of your heart, every sigh that escapes your lips when night comes and sleep won't come. I know you are here because your soul seeks rest, because your thoughts race, like troubled waters when there should be peace. Come, sit beside me. Let my presence wrap around you like a soft, warm blanket. There is no rush here, no demands or judgments. This is a sacred moment, just ours, where your weary soul can finally find the rest it has been seeking. I see you there, with heavy eyes but an awakened mind, fighting against thoughts that refuse to quiet down. I know this struggle, for when I walked among you, I too knew nights when the weight of the world seemed impossible to carry. Do you remember when I prayed in Gethsemane? My soul was deeply troubled, but I found peace in surrendering to the Father. Today, I want to share with you some special moments from my earthly journey. Simple stories, but filled with love and meaning. Stories that can be like drops of holy oil upon your wounded soul, like gentle balm upon your deepest pains. As I speak, feel your breathing becoming calmer, deeper. Each word I share carries a vibration of peace that gently penetrates your heart. Allow this peace to spread throughout your entire being, like the golden light of dawn that gradually illuminates the still sleeping landscape. You don't need to do anything but listen. You don't need to strain to understand everything or memorize every detail. Just let my voice be like a lullaby for your soul, like the gentle sound of tranquil waters flowing slowly, unhurried, carrying away all the tension and anxiety you bear. This moment is a gift from God to you, a time of healing, of restoration, of reconnection with what is most sacred within you. As we walk together through these memories, your soul will remember its true nature. You are loved, you are precious, you are a child of divine light. There was a morning, long before you knew me as the Christ, when I was still just a young carpenter in Nazareth. The sun rose slowly over the hills of Galilee, painting the sky with soft tones of pink and gold. I was in my small workshop, working with wood, feeling the rough texture beneath my hands, when something extraordinary happened. It was as if time had stopped. The noise of the tools ceased. The birds singing became a distant whisper, and in the profound silence that settled in, I heard my Father's voice. It wasn't a voice that came from outside, but one that flowed from within my heart, like a crystal spring that suddenly begins to pour forth pure water. "My beloved son," he said, "the time has come. Put down your tools. Leave the wood you carve to embrace the mission of carving hearts. It is time to begin the journey I have prepared for you since before the foundation of the world." In that moment, my dear soul who listens to me, I felt something that perhaps you too have felt, the deep call of the divine echoing within me. It was as if my entire life up to that point had been preparation for this moment. Every experience, every joy, every difficulty, everything had been a step on the ladder that would lead me to fulfill my purpose. I left the wood on the workbench, a piece half finished, that would never be completed. I put away the tools carefully, like someone saying goodbye to old friends. My mother Mary was in the yard, hanging clothes on the line, and when our eyes met, she knew. Mothers always know, don't they? She saw in my gaze that something had changed forever. I approached her slowly. Her hands stopped working, and she looked at me with that mixture of pride and concern that only a mother can feel. "The time has come, hasn't it, my son?" she asked, her voice filled with love and understanding. "Yes, mother," I replied, wrapping her in my arms. "The Father calls me. I must go." She cried a little, as was natural, but her tears were not of despair. They were tears of surrender, of deep acceptance of the divine will. In that embrace, I felt all the love she had poured into me during all those years, all the care, all the silent devotion. You know, my dear friend who seeks sleep, sometimes life calls us to great changes. Sometimes we need to leave behind what is familiar and safe to embrace the unknown. And this can bring anxiety, it can bring fear. But when the call comes from the Father, when it springs from within the heart like a fountain of love, we can be certain that we are not alone that morning. When I left the house of my childhood, I felt like a seed that was about to be planted. In new soil, there was nervousness, yes, but also a holy expectation, a deep joy in knowing that I was aligned with the divine purpose for my life. I walked through the streets of Nazareth one last time as a carpenter. I greeted the neighbors, watched the children playing, smelled the bread being baked in family ovens. All of this would remain as a precious memory in my heart. But I knew I was being called to something greater. Not greater in terms of worldly importance, but greater in terms of love, purpose, service to humanity. I was being called to be a bridge between heaven and earth, to bring divine light to hearts living in darkness. As you listen to this story, allow the same peace I felt that day to descend upon you now. You too have a calling. You too have a divine purpose. It may not be as dramatic as mine, but it is equally sacred, equally important in the Father's eyes. And so, leaving behind familiar life, I took my first steps toward the Jordan River, where a holy man named John awaited me, who baptized people and prepared the way for my mission. The Jordan River has always been special to our people. Its waters have witnessed so many stories, so many miracles, so many transformations. When I arrived at its banks, I found a multitude gathered around a man of rugged appearance, dressed in camel's hair, who spoke with a passion that touched hearts. It was John, my cousin, the one the Father had chosen to prepare the way before me. His words echoed over the waters, "Repent. The kingdom of heaven is near." There was a holy urgency in his voice, but also a deep love for each person who came to him seeking a new beginning. When John saw me approaching, his eyes filled with tears. He stopped speaking and for a moment just watched me as if he couldn't believe that moment had finally come. The crowd turned to see what had caught his attention, and in the silence that followed, only the sound of the river waters continued their eternal song. "Cousin," he said, coming to meet me, "you have come to me to be baptized, but I am the one who should be baptized by you. How can I, who am merely a servant, baptize the one who is Lord?" His humility touched me deeply. I placed my hands on his shoulders and looked into his eyes with all the love I felt for him. "John," I said, "this is how it must be for now. We need to fulfill all righteousness. We need to set an example of obedience and humility for all who watch us." He understood. We both entered the water together, and I felt the gentle current of the river caressing my feet, then my legs. The water was neither cold nor warm. It was the perfect temperature, as if all of nature conspired to make that moment special. The people on the bank watched us in respectful silence. I could feel their expectations, their hopes, their fears too. Many there had lost faith over the years. Others were there merely out of curiosity. But there was a small group that truly believed something sacred was about to happen. John placed his hand on my head and for a moment hesitated. "Are you sure, Jesus?" he asked in a low voice, just for me to hear. "I am," I replied. "This is the Father's will. When the water covered my head and my whole body was submerged, I felt something extraordinary happen. It was as if I was being embraced not just by the waters of Jordan, but by all the love of the universe. Every drop of water that touched my skin carried the tears, joys, pains, and hopes of all humanity under the water. In the absolute silence of that sacred plunge, I heard the Father's voice again, but this time it wasn't just for me. It was a voice that would echo through the centuries, reaching even you, my dear friend who seeks peace in this moment. This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. When I emerged from the waters, something happened that changed everything. The heavens opened, not metaphorically, but literally. It was as if a giant door in the firmament opened, pouring forth a golden light more intense than the sun, but which didn't hurt the eyes. It was a light that warmed the heart, that brought immediate peace to every soul that beheld it. And then, descending through the celestial opening, I saw the Holy Spirit coming in the form of a dove. It wasn't an ordinary dove, but a creature of pure light, of love made manifest. It descended gently, without haste, and alighted upon me like a divine blessing in that moment. I felt completely connected with the Father, completely anointed for the mission that awaited me. But more than that, I felt that experience wasn't just mine, it was a gift for all humanity. Every person present there, every person who would hear this story through the centuries, was being invited to participate in this same divine connection. The crowd fell into absolute silence. Some people fell to their knees, others raised their hands in worship. I saw tears streaming down the weathered faces of fishermen. I saw smiles of peace on faces marked by suffering. In that moment, all of us experienced a glimpse of what it will be like when the kingdom of heaven finally manifests completely on earth. John was radiant. His face shone with a joy he couldn't contain. "Did you see?" he said to the crowd, his voice trembling with emotion. "This is the Lamb of God, who takes away the sin of the world. This is the one I was speaking about." When I came out of the water, I felt different. Not that I had become something I wasn't before, but it was as if everything in me had been activated, awakened, anointed for service. It was as if every cell in my body now pulsed with divine purpose. My dear friend who listens to me, I want you to know that this same anointing is available to you. You don't need to go to the Jordan River physically. Wherever you are now, lying in your bed, seeking rest, know that the waters of divine grace can wash your soul, can bring renewal to your weary spirit. Close your eyes and imagine yourself in those sacred waters. Feel the gentle current washing away your worries, your pains, your sleeplessness. Allow the peace that descended upon me that day to descend upon you now as well. From those sacred waters, the Spirit led me to a place of solitude and testing, where I learned lessons I would later share with all hearts thirsting for truth. After the baptism, the Holy Spirit led me to a place that would forever change my understanding of spiritual strength and dependence on God. It was the Judean desert, an arid vastness where the silence is so profound you can hear your own heart beating, where every breath becomes a prayer. I walked for hours until I found the place the Father had prepared for me. It was a small cave, carved in the living rock, protected from the scorching sun of day and the bitter cold of night. There, far from all the distractions of the world, I would spend 40 days and 40 nights in fasting and prayer. In the first days, my dear friend, I still felt the euphoria of baptism. The memory of the Father's voice echoed in my mind. The sensation of the dove alighting upon me still warmed my heart. But gradually, as my body began to feel the effects of fasting. A much deeper trial began. The desert has a peculiar way of stripping us of everything superficial. Without food, without the usual comforts, without the company of other people, we are confronted with our purest essence. There, in that immense silence, I began to understand aspects of human nature that I carried in my incarnate heart. I felt hunger, a deep hunger, not just for food, but for comfort, for companionship, for ease. I felt thirst in a way I had never experienced before. But more than that, I felt the vulnerability of one who depends completely on God to survive. It was a lesson in humility I needed to learn before beginning my ministry. During the nights, when the stars shone with an intensity impossible to see in cities, I prayed. I spoke with the Father about each person I would one day meet, about each heart I would try to touch, about each soul that would seek healing through me. I saw faces in my mind, faces of people I hadn't yet met, but whom the Father had already placed in my heart. There were nights when the desert wind howled like a lonely creature, and in that sound I heard the laments of all humanity. I heard their pains, their anguish, their sleeplessness. Yes, my friend who seeks rest. I heard also those who, like you now, struggled against nighttime restlessness, against thoughts that wouldn't quiet down. But there were also moments of absolute peace. When the silence was so complete it seemed the whole world had stopped to listen to the beating of God's heart. In these moments, I received visions of what my ministry would be. I saw myself walking the dusty roads of Palestine, teaching multitudes hungry for hope, touching lepers and restoring their dignity, embracing children and blessing them. It was on the 39th day that he appeared. Satan, the tempter, the one who from the beginning opposes God's plan of love. He didn't come as a frightening monster, but disguised as an angel of light, with smooth words and apparently reasonable arguments. "If you are indeed the Son of God," he said, pointing to the stones scattered on the ground, "turn these stones into bread. You have been hungry for so many days. Why suffer when you can relieve your hunger with a simple miracle?" The temptation was real, my dear friend. My body cried out for food. Every fiber of my being clamored for relief. But then I remembered the words the Father had placed in Moses' heart centuries before. "Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God." I understood in that moment that the true hunger humanity carries is not physical, but spiritual. People don't just need food for the body, but food for the soul. They need purpose, love, connection with the divine. And my mission was to feed this deeper hunger. The tempter didn't give up. He took me in spirit to the pinnacle of the temple in Jerusalem, and from there I could see the whole city spread out below. "If you throw yourself from here," he said, "the angels will support you, and everyone will see that you are truly special." What a dramatic way to begin your ministry. But I knew that true faith doesn't need spectacles. Genuine love doesn't manifest through exhibitionism, but through silent service. Everyday compassion, constant presence beside those who suffer. "You shall not tempt the Lord your God," I replied, again quoting the scriptures the Father had engraved on my heart. The third temptation was the most subtle. The enemy showed me all the kingdoms of the world in their glory, all the political and economic power that could be mine. "All this I will give you," he said, "if you will bow down and worship me." Imagine the good you could do with all this power. For a moment, I saw the possibilities. I could end world hunger. I could bring justice through force. I could establish peace through dominion. But then I understood that this was not the Father's way. God's kingdom is not established through force or manipulation, but through love, surrender, sacrifice. Get away, Satan, I said with an authority that flowed not from myself, but from the Spirit dwelling within me. For it is written, "You shall worship the Lord your God, and him only shall you serve." In that moment, the tempter withdrew, defeated not by force, but by faithfulness. And then, my dear friend, something beautiful happened. Angels appeared and began to minister to me. They brought heavenly food, crystal water, and more than that, they brought confirmation that whoever remains faithful to God is never abandoned. As I ate that food, prepared by angelic hands, I felt renewed strength coursing through my entire being. It wasn't just physical strength, but spiritual strength to face the challenges that would come. It was the certainty that, however difficult the moments ahead might be, the Father would always provide everything necessary. On that last night, in the desert, before returning to the world of men, I had a vision of you, my dear friend who listens to me now. I saw you struggling against your own temptations, the temptation of despair, anxiety, lack of faith. I saw your sleepless nights, your moments of pain, your silent tears, and I want you to know that, just as the angels ministered to me in that desert, they are also available to minister to you. Your struggle may seem small compared to the great temptations I faced, but to the Father's heart, every battle you fight is equally important. When I left that cave on the morning of the 41st day, I carried with me an unshakable confidence in divine provision. I had learned that our strength doesn't come from ourselves, but from our connection with God. I had discovered that true victory isn't in avoiding difficulties, but in remaining faithful during them. From the silence of the desert, I returned to the world of men, carrying in my heart the certainty that I was ready to begin planting seeds of love and hope in every life I would touch. After the days of purification in the desert, I returned to Galilee with my heart overflowing with love and purpose. It was time to begin manifesting the kingdom of heaven in a practical way, touching lives in simple but transformative ways. And the Father, in his infinite wisdom, chose a wedding to be the setting for my first public miracle. Cana was a small village, not very different from Nazareth, where people knew each other by name and everyone's joys became everyone's joys. My mother Mary had been invited to the wedding of some distant relatives, and by extension, my first disciples and I were also included in the celebration. What joy there was that day! The bride and groom radiated happiness, families gathered in harmony, children ran between the tables, laughing endlessly. The sun shone gently over the courtyard, decorated with wildflowers, and the aroma of fresh bread and spices hung in the air. It was exactly the kind of environment where God's love feels most present in life's simple celebrations. During the feast, I observed the people around me. I saw the discreet pride of the bride and groom's parents. I saw the genuine joy of friends. I saw children playing carefree, oblivious to the problems of the adult world. My heart filled with gratitude for being part of that moment of pure human happiness. It was then that my mother approached me with a worried expression. She had noticed something the guests hadn't yet realized. The wine was running out, and the feast was only halfway through. To us, this might seem like a small problem, but in that culture, running out of wine at a wedding was a terrible shame for the bride and groom's family. "Son," she said to me discreetly, "they have no more wine." I looked into my mother's eyes and saw there not just concern for the hosts, but a deep faith in me. She knew who I was, even though she hadn't yet seen any public miracles. There was something in her gaze that said, I know you can do something to help these people." For a moment, I hesitated. I knew that once I began to manifest my power publicly, there would be no turning back. My simple life as a carpenter would be left behind definitively. But then I looked again at the bride and groom, at their families, at all those faces full of joy that would soon turn to embarrassment and sadness. "Woman, what does this have to do with us?" I replied, using an expression that in our culture wasn't disrespectful, but indicated that I needed to follow the Father's timing, not human impulses. "My hour has not yet come." But my mother, with that peculiar wisdom of mothers, simply turned to the servants who were nearby and said, "Do whatever he tells you." She didn't doubt for even a second. Her faith touched me deeply and showed me that perhaps the Father's hour had indeed come. I looked around and saw 6 stone water jars that were there for ceremonial purification. They were large, each with a capacity of about 25 gallons. I called the servants and said to them, "Fill these jars with water." They looked at me with some confusion, but obeyed. They brought jar after jar of water, filling each container to the brim. While they worked, I prayed silently to the Father. It wasn't a prayer asking for power, but a prayer of surrender, of alignment with His will. I felt a current of divine love flowing through me, a connection so intense with the Father's heart that for a moment, it was as if there was no difference between my will and His. When the jars were full, I said to the servants, "Now draw some out and take it to the master of the banquet." They hesitated. Water wasn't exactly what was expected to be served to the guests, but there was something in my voice, a gentle but firm authority that encouraged them to obey. What happened in that moment, my dear friend, was more than a simple chemical transformation. It was a manifestation of God's creative power, the same power that in the beginning transformed chaos into cosmos, darkness into light. Those water molecules, through the divine love that flowed through me, reorganized themselves into something completely new. The master of the banquet, not knowing where this liquid came from, tasted it, and his eyes widened with surprise. It wasn't just wine, it was the best wine he had ever tasted in his life. Rich, aromatic, perfectly balanced. He called the groom aside and said, "Everyone brings out the choice wine first, and then the cheaper wine after the guests have had too much to drink. But you have saved the best till now." I saw the confusion and then the joy on the groom's face. He didn't know how to explain that miracle, but he knew his feast had been saved. I saw the relief on the parents' faces. I saw the renewed joy of the guests when they realized the celebration would continue with even more abundance. But what touched me most was observing the servants, who had obeyed my instructions. They knew exactly what had happened. They had seen the water transform into wine before their eyes, and in their faces I saw something that would become familiar throughout my entire ministry. The mixture of wonder and faith that is born when someone witnesses the impossible becoming possible. My disciples, who until then had followed me more out of curiosity than absolute conviction, were deeply impressed. Peter, always impulsive, came to me and whispered, "Master, how did you?" But I just smiled and placed my hand on his shoulder. There would be time for explanations later. At that moment, it was time to celebrate. The rest of the feast passed in an atmosphere of even greater joy. The wine I created not only saved the celebration, but elevated it to a level of jubilation no one expected. People danced with more energy, laughed with more gusto, celebrated the couple's love with more intensity. Night, when the feast finally ended and people began to leave, I remained for a few moments alone in the courtyard. I looked at the empty jars, at the remains of the celebration, at the stars shining in the Galilean sky, and felt a deep peace. I had taken my first public step in manifesting God's kingdom, and I had chosen to do it not through something grand or frightening, but through a practical act of love, solving a simple problem for simple people. This would be the pattern of my entire ministry, touching lives in concrete ways, bringing solutions to real needs, manifesting God's love through tangible gestures. My dear friend who listens to me, I want you to know that this same transforming power is available for your life today. It may not be turning water into wine, but it can be transforming your anguish into peace, your sleeplessness into rest, your pain into healing. The God who acted through me that day in Cana is the same one who wants to act in your life at this moment. From that first miracle in Cana, my fame began to spread, and soon multitudes began to seek me out, bringing their wounded bodies and their souls thirsting for hope. After the miracle at Cana, my life changed completely. The news spread faster than wind carrying seeds, and soon people from all over the region began seeking me out. They came with hopes stored in their hearts for years, carrying pain that doctors couldn't heal, bringing faith mixed with desperation. I especially remember one morning when I was teaching near the Sea of Galilee. The sun was rising, painting the waters golden, and a gentle breeze carried the fresh scent of the lake. There was a crowd gathered, fishermen who had left their nets, merchants who had closed their stores, mothers who had brought their children in their arms. In the middle of the crowd, I saw a different kind of movement. People were stepping back, creating a reluctant corridor. It was a leper approaching. His skin was marked by the terrible disease, his clothes were torn as the law required, and he was shouting, "Unclean, unclean," as was mandatory to warn others about his condition. But his eyes, oh my dear friend, his eyes shone with a faith I had rarely seen. Despite all the rejection he suffered daily, despite living like the walking dead in society, he believed I could heal him when he came near me. He did something that shocked everyone. He knelt at my feet. A leper wasn't supposed to get so close to healthy people, much less touch the ground near a rabbi. But there he was, prostrate in complete humility. And his words touched my heart like few things in life had touched it. "Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean." There was no demand in his voice, no bargaining or emotional manipulation. It was a simple declaration of faith. He believed in my power, but respected my will. It was the purest faith I could imagine. The crowd fell into absolute silence. Everyone waited to see what I would do. According to religious law, I should step away, keep my distance, preserve my ritual purity. But looking at that broken man, I felt a compassion so deep it seemed to tear through my chest. I stretched out my hand and touched him. The shock in the crowd was audible. People screamed. Others stepped back even further. Touching a leper was unthinkable, but I knew something they didn't know. It wasn't his impurity that would contaminate me, but my purity that would cleanse him. "I am willing," I said, my voice filled with all the love I felt for that child of God. "Be clean." What happened next was indescribable. It was as if pure light flowed through my hands into his wounded skin. I saw the necrotic flesh renewing itself. I saw the wounds closing. I saw healthy color returning to his face. In a matter of seconds, he was completely healed. But the healing wasn't just physical. I saw something deeper happening in his eyes. Years of rejection, loneliness, and shame were washed away by a wave of restored dignity. He was no longer an untouchable, he was a beloved child of God. Completely restored. Tears streamed down his renewed face as he looked at his own hands, now perfect. "Thank you," was all he could whisper. But in those two words was a gratitude that would echo through eternity. I then told him, "See that you don't tell anyone, but go, show yourself to the priest, and offer the gift Moses commanded as a testimony." To them, he needed to follow the religious protocols to be officially declared clean and able to return to society. He left running, and I knew that despite my instructions, he would tell everyone about his healing. How could he stay quiet in the face of such grace? That same morning, they brought me a woman who had been suffering from bleeding for 12 years. 12 long years unable to touch anyone, being considered unclean, spending everything she had on doctors who couldn't help her. She was weak, pale, almost without strength to stand. But there was something in her eyes that moved me deeply. It was a quiet determination, a faith that had survived 12 years of disappointment and pain. She didn't approach from the front, afraid of being rejected once more. Instead, she came from behind, in the crowd that followed me. If I just touch his clothes, I heard her whisper to herself, "I will be healed." When her fingers touched the hem of my tunic, I immediately felt that power had gone out from me. It was like an electric current of divine love had passed through the fabric into her body. I stopped immediately and asked, "Who touched my clothes?" My disciples were confused. "Master," Peter said, "you see the crowd pressing against you from all sides and you ask, 'Who touched me?' But I knew it had been a different kind of touch. It wasn't the casual push of the crowd, but the touch of desperate faith." I looked around until my eyes met hers. She was trembling, knowing she had been discovered. She fell at my feet and, with tears in her eyes, told her whole story before everyone. She spoke of the 12 years of suffering, of the doctors who couldn't help her, of the faith that brought her there. And as she spoke, I could see that she was completely healed. Color had returned to her face. Weakness had disappeared from her movements. "Daughter," I said, gently placing my hand on her head, "your faith has healed you. Go in peace, and be freed from your suffering." The joy that shone in her eyes at that moment is something I will carry with me for eternity. It was the joy of someone who had recovered not just health, but hope, dignity, their place in society. That day, my dear friend, I healed many others. The blind recovered their sight. The deaf could hear again. The paralyzed walked. But each healing was more than a physical miracle. It was the complete restoration of a life. The return of hope, the tangible demonstration of God's infinite love. That night, when I finally had a moment of silence, I reflected on everything that had happened. Each person I touched had also touched me. Each pain I healed had passed through my own heart. Each tear of joy I saw filled me with a deep satisfaction that no earthly treasure could provide. You who listen to me now know that the same power that flowed through me in those days is still available today. It may not be a dramatic physical healing, but it can be the healing of your weary soul, the restoration of your inner peace, the relief from the anxiety that won't let you sleep. Close your eyes and allow my touch of love to reach you now. Let the same compassion I felt for that leper, for that sick woman, flow into your heart at this moment. You are not alone in your pain. I am here with you, bringing healing to all the wounded areas of your life. From those days of healing and miracles, a special afternoon was forever etched in my heart, when 5,000 people came to hear me in a deserted place, and the Father, taught me a precious lesson about His abundant provision. There were days when the crowds that followed me were so large they seemed like a sea of hungry faces, not just for food, but for hope, for a word of comfort, for a touch of divinity in their ordinary lives. One of those days became special, not just because of the thousands of people present, but because of the profound lesson the Father wanted to teach about abundance and provision. It was late afternoon, and I had withdrawn with my disciples to a deserted place near the Sea of Galilee, seeking a moment of rest. But the people discovered where we were and came on foot from distant villages, bringing their sick, their children, their hearts heavy with expectation. When I saw that crowd approaching, I felt like a shepherd who sees his lost sheep finally finding their way home. I couldn't send them away. How could I? Each face there represented a story of pain, a search for meaning, a thirst for divine love. I spent hours teaching, healing, blessing. I saw tears of joy when the blind saw their children again. I heard shouts of jubilation when the paralyzed got up and ran to embrace their families. Each miracle was a small manifestation of God's kingdom happening right there, in that barren place that was transformed into an oasis of hope. When the sun began to set, painting the sky with shades of gold and purple, my disciples approached me with evident concern on their faces. "Master," Andrew said, "this is a deserted place, and the hour is already late. Send the crowds away so they can go to the villages and buy food for themselves." It was a sensible suggestion from a human perspective. There were at least 5,000 men there, not counting women and children, perhaps 15,000 people. In total, we didn't have resources to feed so many people, and the nearby villages certainly wouldn't have enough food for everyone. But I felt the Father whispering in my heart a profound truth. This would be a moment to demonstrate that His provision is not limited by visible resources. They don't need to go away, I told the disciples. You give them something to eat. Peter looked at me as if I had lost my mind. How, Master? It would take 8 months' wages to buy enough food for everyone, and even then it wouldn't be enough. Was then that little Andrew brought a boy to me. He was a child of perhaps 8 or 9 years old, with curious eyes and a shy smile. In his small hands he carried a modest basket, 5 barley loaves, and 2 small fish. It was his lunch, probably all his poor family had managed to prepare for the journey. "Master," Andrew said, somewhat awkwardly, "there's a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 small fish, but what are they among so many?" I looked at that boy and saw something my adult disciples hadn't yet fully understood. Pure faith, without calculations, without mental limitations. When I asked for his lunch, he didn't hesitate for even a second. He didn't ask if there would be anything left for him, didn't do calculations about whether it would be enough. He simply gave everything he had, with a trusting smile. "Have the people sit down," I told the disciples, in groups of 50 and 100. They obeyed, though still confused about what I intended to do. Soon, that chaotic mass of people organized themselves into orderly groups on the green grass, like human gardens scattered across the landscape. I took the 5 loaves and 2 fish in my hands. They were small, simple, ordinary, exactly like the faith of that boy who offered them. I lifted my eyes to heaven and, in the presence of all that crowd, prayed to the Father with sincere gratitude. "Father, thank you for this provision. Thank you for this boy who knew how to give everything he had. Thank you for these people who came seeking your presence. May this food be multiplied not only to satisfy the hunger of bodies, but to strengthen faith in hearts." And then the miracle happened. It wasn't a dramatic spectacle, but something subtle and profound. When I broke the first loaf, there was more bread. When I divided the first fish, there was more fish. It was as if God's abundance flowed through my hands, transforming scarcity into plenty. I began distributing to the disciples, who took the food to the groups. And the more they distributed, the more there was. It was a continuous cycle of multiplication, not just of the food, but of the faith of all who witnessed that miracle. I saw amazement on people's faces when they realized there was enough food for everyone. I saw children eating until they were satisfied. I saw adults sharing in a spirit of gratitude. I saw entire families gathered around divine provision. No one went hungry that day. Everyone ate and was satisfied. But what touched me most was watching the boy who had offered his lunch. His eyes sparkled with joy, not because he had gotten his food back multiplied, but because he had participated in a miracle of God. He understood, with his childlike wisdom, that when we place our small offerings in God's hands, He does extraordinary things. When everyone finished eating, I told the disciples, "Gather the pieces that are left over, so that nothing is wasted." They went out with baskets and collected the fragments. There were 12 baskets full, more than we had at the beginning. It was a clear demonstration that God's abundance always exceeds our needs. That night, when the crowd finally dispersed to return to their homes, I remained for a few moments contemplating what had happened. It wasn't just about bread and fish. It was about multiplied hope, increased faith, shared love. It was about discovering that when we offer the little we have with generous hearts, God works miracles. My dear friend who listens to me, you may be feeling like that boy, thinking you have too little to offer, too little to contribute. But I want you to know that God doesn't need great resources to perform great miracles. He just needs hearts willing to give everything they have, however small it may be. Your simple prayers, your small faith, your humble gestures of love, all of this can be multiplied in God's hands in ways you can't even imagine. Don't underestimate the power of a sincere offering, however modest it may seem. As you prepare for sleep, remember this truth: the God who multiplied 5 loaves to feed 5,000 people is the same one who can multiply your peace to calm 1,000 anxieties, your hope to illuminate 1,000 moments of darkness, your rest to restore 1,000 nights of insomnia. From that day of miracles and abundance, one last story I want to share with you before sleep comes. The story of how the most frightening storm became the deepest peace. And so, my dear son, my dear daughter, we come to the end of this nighttime journey together. I have shared with you precious moments from my earthly walk, the Father's call, the baptismal waters, the silence of the desert, the first miracle, the power of healing, and the abundance of divine provision. Each story I told carries within it a promise for you. You are not alone in your struggles. Your pain has meaning. Your weariness will find rest. The same love that sustained me during my mission on earth is the love that surrounds you at this moment, preparing your heart and mind for the restorative sleep you so need. As your eyelids grow heavy and your breathing deepens, know that it is I who watches over your sleep. It is I who transforms your anxieties into peace, your fears into confidence, your pain into healing. Sleep with the certainty that you are unconditionally loved, that you are precious in the Father's eyes, that your life has divine purpose. May this rest restore not only your body, but also your soul. May you awaken renewed, strengthened, full of the hope that comes from knowing you walk hand in hand with me through all the days of your life. Sleep in peace, my beloved. Sleep in peace,